If you're prepping a Shakespeare monologue and you are going straight to memorizing your lines or trying to connect to the emotion, then you are making the mistake that most actors are making that stops them getting into drama school or getting the role that they want. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 simple steps you can do in your prep to make you stand out in your audition. If you don't know me, I'm Sarah Guillot. I'm a Shakespeare coach, and these things that I'm going to show you are steps that I never skip, and I never let my students skip them because they are such game changers. I hate the word game changers, but they really are game changers. So let's do this. I want to show you how to do them. My first technique is so important, but it's going to sound super basic and obvious. And so you might be like, but I want you to stick with me because most people are doing this, I won't say wrong, but they're doing it in a way that's not really helping them that much. So I want to show you how to do it in a way that actually works. Okay, so the first thing that you must do is you must put the monologue into your own words. So before you go, oh yeah, and click off the video, here's what people are doing wrong with this. Number 1, they're going on to something like Spark Notes, Know for Your Shakespeare, and they're like, great, modern translation, done. That is not enough, my friend. Not to demonize these things. They're actually great as a starting point, but they're just a starting point. You need to know that those translations are written for students. They're really designed to be kind of the simplest version of the text. Now, as an actor, you don't want the simplest version of the text. They actually really kind of boil it down. You don't want it boiled down because you need to play specifics. Specific acting is what makes you stand out. You need to remember basic paraphrase equals basic acting. You don't want basic acting. I don't want you to have basic acting. Here's the other thing that people are doing wrong here. What they're usually doing, and even if you're trying to write it out yourself, you're like, I get it, I wrote it out myself. Usually what people are doing is actually more of a summary. So what I actually want you to think about is a translation, not a paraphrase. So think, even if you're a native English speaker, I want you to think this is a completely different language. Because it's so far removed from modern English that it's almost another language. There's so many words that we need to pick apart. And just like when you're learning a new language, you will actually translate pretty much word for word in your head. That is the most effective way to get really, really connected and really clear on what you're saying. And the benefit of digging so deeply in it is as you go through, you'll actually be making choices. Now, most actors, especially beginner actors, are not great at making choices. They're playing very broadly a lot of the time, and they haven't really made those specific choices where they go, no, it's not that, it's this. And this happens in Shakespeare, right? We're hit with a word that we're like, oh, there isn't really a modern version of that. The closest thing is either this or this. So which one do I think it is? And a really simple example of that in Shakespeare is the word noble. We don't really use that word in modern English. Like, we know what it means, right? But if you had to say it in your own words, you probably never said the word noble in your life, right? So you have to go, okay, well, but when I say noble, do I mean kind of courteous and kind? Or do I mean like brave, right? They're different. They have different resonances. So when you're getting this picky, you start to get more alive in it because you're like, no, I think it means brave, right? And so there are things I want you to keep in mind with this. As you're going through and you're picking it apart word by word, firstly, you need to ask yourself, this is so important, ask yourself, how would I say that? It must be words that you use in your everyday life. If it's a word that you've never used before, then it's not going to help you. You're just going to have it in the back of your head and be disconnected. Because this modern translation, when we do it right, it becomes like an inner monologue in the back of our minds as we perform. So you want an inner monologue that feels and sounds just like you. And basically then you're already thinking in character. So you must translate it into words that you would use. And hopefully as you go through, what this will actually do is help you feel kind of confidence and ownership over the text, because there's not just one way to interpret Shakespeare. Shakespeare is massively complex, and even different editors, different scholars will read a sentence and go, oh, I think it means this. And then someone else will go, no, I think it means that. So you're allowed to have your opinion. And in fact, you must have an opinion in order to act it well. So this is your first step to having an opinion, is pick it apart word by word. What is this? What is that? It takes a little time. But for me personally, I put on a timer for like 45 minutes maybe, and I dig and I just do my best. And then it will change over time. So that's the other thing that you'll come back to is the more that you work on the monologue, you might go, oh no, it's not that, it's this. So it's a working document, your translation. It'll actually change over time. I'm actually teaching this in my upcoming live course. I'm doing an Acting Shakespeare Made Simple course where we're going to dig into these essential game changer exercises. So if you want to join me and learn it live, and I've got exercises that we do with it as well so we can go deeper, get it up on the floor. Oh, and we'll be recording the course. So if you're watching this in the future, then you can grab the recording. Check it out in the description. Come along, join me. Did my face look crazy just then? Okay, so now we're thinking in character, right? But we're not gonna stop there, we're gonna go even deeper. So this brings me to my second technique, which I call connecting thoughts. So this is all about understanding the journey that the character goes on through the course of the monologue. And you can do this with scenes, you can do this with full productions, totally fine as well. Sometimes when actors come to Shakespeare, they think that there's no subtext because Shakespeare's characters tend to say what they mean and mean what they say. But that is not true. There's always more going on underneath the surface. And really the key to bringing your monologue to life in a way that draws the audience in is understanding those transitions, the subtext and those little thoughts in between things happening. So you understand how that character is being propelled forward. The Shakespeare's characters tend to think and act fairly fast. You might think that that's not true, particularly because of characters like Hamlet, who tends to get a little bit stuck and not act, and he is actually constantly making decisions and deciding then not to act. He is not a great example, so put Hamlet away, but generally Shakespeare's characters, they're thinking fast. And so when you've got a monologue, they're often moving very quickly from one idea to the next. Most actors are missing, how do those ideas actually connect? How am I getting from A to B? So what we're doing when we do connecting thoughts is creating a bridge. We're identifying what's that thought, the shift that happens that makes them go, oh, I was talking about this, but actually what I'm going to do that, or I'm going to talk about this next. It's not just a random tangent. They're always got a reason for those shifts. So to do this, you just need to start by sectioning up the text, breaking it up into what you might call beats or units. You've probably done that sort of thing with your contemporary work before. Now, sometimes with Shakespeare, people get a little bit confused about where those units are. The simplest way to do it is just separate them by the periods or full stops, right? So just put a little space in between them or a line in between the periods so you can see, that's the end of the sentence at the very least. Because in Shakespeare, those beats or units, they're sometimes called thought units, they move very, very quickly. They're sometimes just a couple of lines long, usually a bit shorter than in contemporary. So you really need to identify, whoa, okay, we've moved from one idea to the next, and we need to understand what the difference is between each of those ideas and how did we get there. So you might start by labeling, what is this section about? If I could summarize it, here we're going to summarize. What's this about in one sentence? What is the topic? Kind of, like an essay. What is the topic of this section here? And what's the topic of that one? And before you make a really common mistake, don't make the thought just the same as what they're saying. Because sometimes people get a little bit confused and they kind of just use their paraphrase there. It needs to be quite different. So if you think about in everyday life, if I look around and I'm like, thinking, oh man, my floor's really dirty, let's say, I might say out loud, I need to vacuum. They're related, right? But I'm not saying exactly the same thing. I had a thought that prompted me to speak. So to test it out, what I want you to do is actually read out loud those thoughts as you go through the monologue and see if they make you feel like, oh, you know what, I want to say this next bit. If they don't make you feel like you want to say the next bit, then it's not the right thought. And again, just like with our translation, this is a working document. You might change it a lot over time. So I always recommend to my students, just put something down, get up on the floor and test it out, because when you do it in practice, it's so much more informative than just spending hours sitting there and going, I don't know. Write something down, give it a try, see how you feel. Your gut is the best guide. So when that all comes together and it works, what it creates is this really urgent feeling. It really gets dynamic. And I got to tell you, that's something that most actors are lacking in their monologues. Contemporary too. You can actually do this with your contemporary monologues. It really is a thing that most people do not do well with monologues. They just do not have anything driving them forward. So this is a game changer. Oh man. Can you drop in the comments, what other words can I use apart from game changer? Because I truly do not love it, but they really do change everything. And a little bonus thing about this, once you get it right, it also helps with memorization, because usually the problem if you're struggling to memorize is usually that you don't understand that transition moment. Ta-da! Right, now technique 3 is such an easy win and a game changer. It's looking for repetitive sounds. Now this is really going to help out with your poetry element. If you caught my last video, and I'll link that for you as well, just in case you haven't, we talked about the 3 essential elements that you need to kick off. You need to tick off in Shakespeare. You need to have meaning, poetry, and truthfulness. You need to have them all balanced, all working at once. So most people are not great at that poetic stuff, really bringing out the language features, because it's not something we do very often. Now, this can bring you back to what you might have learned in English class, is just alliteration and assonance, basically. But the simple way to say that is repetitive sounds. Shakespeare is awesome. I call these Shakespeare's signposts because he's really likes to whack us over the head with it. Things that repeat are a sign of what we need to highlight in the text to bring out what's going on textually and texturally. So a really obvious example that I often use is "Full fathom 5 thy father lies." Now you notice that he's got those F sounds. That's from Ariel from The Tempest. He's got those F sounds in there, and when I say them, they actually make me feel like whispery, right? So this is actually a clue from Shakespeare that's actually fairly easy to work with, even if you're a beginner, because certain sounds will make you feel certain ways. If you've got hard sounds, what we call plosives, that kind of like that kind of stuff, those sounds will often make you feel like you're attacking someone, or maybe you're really trying to get your idea across. Whereas those fricative sounds, like the F and the S and the TH and that kind of thing, like in the example I just gave, they often feel maybe whispery. Sometimes they feel a little bit stretchy, because you can kind of stretch them out a bit, right? So just see, what can I do with this sound? And play with it. Try to enjoy it. You really don't need to overthink this. You don't need to know the technical terms like I was talking about, plosives and fricatives. So if your brain is exploding, you're like, I don't know what assonance is. Don't worry, just look for repetitive sounds. Is that sound popping up a lot within about 2 lines? Great, do something with that. Okay, so I want to show you a bit of this in practice. So I've got Phoebe from As You Like It here. And even if I look at just these 3 lines, there is stuff jumping out at me that can really help me make the most of the text. So this first line here, I'm going to start with this line here. "Thou tell'st me there is murder in mine eye." You can probably notice straight away that I've got this repetition of the M sound. And even that N, so close to an M, right? They sort of sit very close together in the mouth. That gives me, okay, all right, I've got that repetition of that M sound. If I read that out loud and lean into that, how does that make me feel? "Thou tell'st me there is murder in mine eye." I feel kind of like sassy. I'm sassy with it. I'm kind of chewing on the words. So that's really interesting there. And then in this next line, a real switch. You can see that she's got this repetition of the P for pretty and P for probable. That's got that kind of almost spitty, like attack sound, right? "'Tis pretty sure and very probable," right? So I've switched from this sass to this like, that's how I feel, right, when I'm doing it, if I go over the top. And then this next line, it's got a lot of those repetitive S and F sound, more towards that whispery sort of feel that we were talking about before. What I often do is I often color code these things just because then it's jumping out at me. That's awful coloring, but let's just try it anyway. "Thou tell'st me there is murder in mine eye. 'Tis pretty sure and very probable that eyes that are the frailest and softest things," etc. Right? So you get the sense there. I'm moving from sound to sound. I'm leaning into the sounds that are most obvious in that line. And that gives me kind of this map to move through the text and bring stuff out. Now, you might be worried that you're going to overdo it. So many actors are like, I'm going to sound like I'm completely going over the top. I can tell you that most of the time people don't sound like they're going over the top because most people aren't doing anything. So what I recommend is go really big in your rehearsal, because in performance, it will kind of find a middle ground. It will actually just settle down, because we kind of, most of the time, we're holding back a little bit. And you also don't want to have to think about it consciously in performance. So just doing it in rehearsal is enough. The homework will work on you. So there you go. You've got some exercises that can start you off. Now you notice that these exercises that I've been sharing in this video are more script analysis-y, on the page stuff. You can see here I'm sitting at my computer. But of course, at some point we have to get it into the body. So firstly, make sure that you do actually get up and try these things out loud. But also I want to show you in the next video something that can help you make that shift into that embodiment stage, which is really like, how do I actually perform this? That can really help you out in a really short amount of time. Again, another game changer. All right, so I'll see you in the next video. Mwah.